for this today's webinar on ensuring effective mechanisms for compliance. And today's webinar is going to take thermal power plant as a case study. Now, as you all know, coal-based power plant is one of the most resource-intensive and polluting sector. I just want to share a small data, like when you take all the industrial sector together, 45% of the SOx emission, 30% of the NOx emission, and 80% of the mercury emission is from thermal power plant. It's a huge water guzzling sector, something around 24 billion metric cube of water, which is like almost half of the India's total domestic needs. And fly ash. For last 20-25 years, Government of India is working with the sector, but the problem remains unsolved. It was in the year 2015 when Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change decided to take some concrete step to ensure the pollution load from the sector is reduced. In order to do so, they made the emission norms more stringent and gave them 2 years time to implement the standard. After 2 years, some plants were given another 2 years time and rest 2022 deadline to meet the new stringent emission norms. Now, recently we have seen a section of the Association of Power Producer approached Supreme Court to extend the deadline, giving various reasons. Center for Science and Environment has been working in this sector for last more than 1 decade. And we believe it's now high time that the sector take some proactive step and ensure the 22 deadline is met. Still, when we look at the data, we are 100% sure not all the plants are going to meet the new norms. So, what should be our next step? Keeping that in mind, Center for Science and Environment is coming out with a concept called First Run, where we are joining compliance with some kind of financial mechanism, which my colleague Sundram Ramanathan will share with you all. And we have got a list of panelists. I would like to introduce Mr. Asu Gupta, who is retired General Manager, Environment, NTPC. Mr. Ashok Srinivas, Senior Fellow, Prayas Energy Group. And Karthik Ganesan, Fellow, Council on Energy, Environment and Water. They will share from their experience, like what needs to be done to ensure, in general, the compliance is met by the polluting industrial sector. Before I invite Sundram Ramanathan to share her presentation, I just want to go flip through 2 of my slides. Sundram, can you open the slide, please? Next slide. Why we are discussing coal? Coal use and the world dependence on it for powering its energy need is major contributor to climate change. It's a known fact. It's not a hidden fact. Coal use in power plant and its use in millions of industrial boiler is major contributor to toxic air pollution. Center for Science and Environment and many other organizations have worked and found out coal is still the king. It is clear that use of coal for energy must be eliminated immediately in the industrialized world, where it still continues to be used and phased out in our part of the world. And there is no denying of the fact. Next slide, please. Now, what is CSE's politics on coal-based power plant? We believe countries like India will need access to affordable energy to meet the need of all. We don't want a society of haves and haves not. We also believe energy poverty is unacceptable and that we need equity on action to combat climate change. Therefore, coal-based power plants are a reality for us, but we will need to work to reduce dependence so that we can meet the challenges of clean air and climate change. Now, what is the priority of the time? Priority of the time is we have to ensure coal-based thermal power plants are as clean as possible. Right now, the installed capacity is about 206 gigawatt. By 2030, it will be 266 gigawatt. And some are saying by 2040, it will be 330 gigawatt. So coal is there. But what we have to ensure, what power we are sourcing is clean. With that, I would like to invite my colleague Sundaram Ramanathan to share the concept of first run which CSE have introduced. Sundaram, please.
Yeah. One second. All right. So as Nivit had just now mentioned, coal is going to rise. And in terms of the pollution, yes, coal is very polluting and water guzzling too. And in terms of pollutant, we are discussing about particulate matter, sulfur dioxide and NOx. So for particulate matter, emission norms were there since the very beginning, but the norms were little relaxed. From say about 2003, the norms have been tightened for the particulate matter in the environmental clearance, but not in general terms. And similarly, there were talks to tighten the sulfur dioxide and tighten in the sense introduce limits for sulfur dioxide and NOx since 2003. The industry and the board has been in talks. Now, after nearly 15 years of talk, they introduced this norms in December 2015, and the norms were supposed to be complied by 2017. Just in like 2 years time, they had to comply with it. But then the industry was consistently pushing back. They were saying, the technology to come to the levels which the ministry has said is not available, space is not available. So they had various reasons to push back and say, no, this can't happen. And finally, after different negotiations and then the MOEF and MOP sitting together and discussing, finally the industry came up by themselves and they said, by 2022, we will meet the norms. But the NOx is not possible, and even meeting the water is not possible technically. So please relax it for us. Rest ensured, we will meet the norm by 2022. Now that was the promise which was given. Now, similarly, NOx and water norms were relaxed according to what the industry asked for, and the deadline was moved to 2022. But as things stand today, when we take an assessment of what is happening on the ground, what we find is only one-fourth of the power stations, the installed capacity which is there, about 68,000 megawatt, they have given out bids, meaning they have given the orders and work has started. Maybe some part of the work is starting, and in a span of 2 years they will install the necessary control system and they can meet the norm. And only in 1% of power stations today, we have the pollution control technology in place to control pollution. Now, for the rest of the capacity, nothing has happened. So if still the buyer, like the vendors are not, vendors are not selected, then how will the things roll out on ground? So we are expecting most of them are likely to not comply. Now, the current implementation mechanism, if you see how do they assess, or this is our assessment. So in 2022, most of them can't meet norms. But how do the ministry or the Central Pollution Control Board take cognizance of this is, once the deadline is reached, that is once 2022 is reached, they'll go check if it is implemented or not. Now, say if it is implemented, then that's fine. If it is not implemented, they issue a show cause notice and they ask for the reasons why has it not been followed. And then based on the reply, if it is if they see some sense of sincerity, then they give a new deadline. If they see there is nothing happening on the ground, then they issue a penalty. They ask for a penalty. Now, if you see how they calculate the penalty, there are two variants in which they calculate. One is under the Environment Protection Act, they calculate. The other is they have an in-house mechanism to calculate the penalty. And typically, it works out to be about 1 crore per annum for one pollutant, depending on the unit size. Now, if you see the fixed charges meaning the coal-based power plants, their tariff component is of two parts. One is the fixed cost and one is the variable cost. Now, we all know that at one point, India did not have so much electricity. We wanted to electrify. The electrification ratio of the country was not 100% back then. So many people didn't have electricity. So electricity was an essential component. And what the government did was, you come establish a coal power plant in our territory, and we'll guarantee that whatever investment you make, you will get it back. The cost, you will get it back. And that investment cost, which is reimbursed, is called the fixed cost. And the cost for which the electricity is generated, the coal and the oil used in the plant to generate that electricity, is called the variable cost. Now, the fixed cost is promised provided the power plant says I'm technically available to generate power, right? So the power plant can say they're technically available to generate power. It is upon the state government to decide whether they want to schedule it, they want to get power out of it or not. So whether they get the power or they don't get the power, this fixed cost is reimbursed to coal power plants. So this is something, even if they don't operate, what they get. And technically, this is the penalty which today we are imposing on them if they don't meet the norms. It's just fraction. And so this seems to be not too effective. And the second option which the board has is they can close the power plant, but obviously it's an essential sector. Everyone needs electricity, so closer not that feasible. And even if you see it in terms of a wholesome picture, the clean coal, the so-called clean coal, the 1/4 of the power, 1/4 of the capacity, which is going to meet the norm, typically can generate about 1,500 to 6,600 billion units. I'm assuming peak demand to be throughout the year. And from clean coal, what you can generate is just 500, 600 billion units. So typically, you can't close them also totally together. But then clean power is what all of us need, right? Because 100% of electrification is done. Now, the next challenge we all have is clean electricity. Right? In the same lines, we conceived the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy because we wanted clean power. And in the Electricity Act also, we had a section 86E to actually promote the renewable energy which the country is going to generate. And to honor this provision only, the Electricity Regulatory Commissions today say that, renewable plants must be uh, should come under the must-run category, right? Because of this particular provision. So here at CSE, we are asking why not we slightly modify and incorporate even clean coal to come under this provision. So in our proposal, what we're studying is basically compliance with the sulfur dioxide norms only. Now, in the particulate matter norm, there has not been much change. The particulate matter norms have been intact. It's in more or less matching with what people have got in their environmental clearance letters. And oxides of nitrogen norm has been diluted. from 300 to 450 now, and most of the experts claim that not much changes will need to be made. So only to comply with sulfur dioxide, the power plants will need to do a little more, put more efforts. So in this study, we've considered compliance with SO2 norms primarily, and the plants which has given out tenders to meet the SOx norms, we call them yellow category plant or the first run plant. And those which are in the process, but they're slow in the sense that they're still meandering with the tenders, or they're doing feasibility study, then we call them orange category. And those plants which have no plan yet, for them we call them red category. Now what we're saying is, after the must run plants, why not we operate the yellow category plants? Now, fundamentally, what we think is, there is a fear of non-operation or minimal operation, which can drive these orange and red plants to compliance. So, from using the CEA data, we have made this categorization. So, CEA is giving out monthly data on what is the status with FGD, uh, from which we understand in October, this is how the status looks. So nearly 40% of the plants are 40% of the capacity was complying in October. So what we're saying is, the must run, obviously the renewables, they run on full load, and the yellow category or the first run, those are the plants which are likely to meet the target. They run on full load. We reimburse them fully, the fixed cost. And the second is the orange category, which are slow, which are likely to miss the target. So what we say is, after you schedule the LO, if there is a need for more power, then you schedule these orange category plant, but then you reimburse only 50% of their fixed cost. And the last comes the red category plants, which will definitely miss the target because they still don't have any plan. Now, literally, it's been 5 years since the announcement of norm. So you don't, primarily you should avoid taking power from them. And even if you take and reimburse no fixed charges to them. So we wanted to do state-wise how this looks through. And what we found was, obviously, as we have been discussing, nearly 40-45% of the capacity is in the cleaner capacity range. And uh, as of today, this is the December data. And what I see is 9 states are procuring less than this 46% average. These are the states starting from West Bengal to TN. So the percentage of unclean power they generate is more than 50%. And these are the states which have a lot of non-attainment cities as well. Non-attainment cities are those which are really polluted. In terms of particulate matter, their particulate matter are on high. And we all know that sulfur dioxide can, turn eventually into these particulate matter particles. Now, the impacts are very evident. Mostly another concern is most of these non-complying stations, they're located in clusters. Now, these are even worrying because, the pollution impact in that zone is going to be horrible. Now, for instance, the Koredi belt in Maharashtra, the Adani, Bhusawal, Chandrapur, there are some 9-10 power stations which are just close by, must be like in 20-kilometer radius, and they're contributing to enormous. Like they have not taken adequate measures, so they're still polluting. And only 13 states or union territories of the 33 states, union territories which are procuring power today, are procuring coal power today, have 100% of their coal power uh, from cleaner plants. And when you read the state's name itself, you can, think about the air quality there. Arunachal Pradesh or Assam or Chandigarh, they're not generating from coal also, and additionally they're sourcing their coal power requirements also from cleaner plants. So we need some sort of an effective mechanism to check, because the large states are the one which are defaulting. Thanks. So you're on mute.
Thank you, Sundram. And it was a very crystal clear presentation where you have tried to connect environmental compliance financial with financial incentive. ठीक है? If I am complying, I am going to be incentivized, and if I don't comply, I am going to be penalized. And I personally don't think there is a problem with it. We will hear from our panelists, and then we will go to the our attendees. Mr. Asu Gupta has some slide to share. Can I request you, Sundram, to share his slide? Sundram? Thank you. I invite Asu Gupta ji.
Thank you, Sudram. Good afternoon, everyone. Next slide, please. So, yeah, the dilemma today is whether it's a tussle between coal plants and RE. The RE, which was being given a lot of incentives earlier, now there is problem in the RE is coming, rate of RE is coming down, whereas the coal plants tariff is going up. So coal plants already are in a lot of problem. Just a minute, please. Sound is. Hello. Now
we can hear you clearly.
The need, the more in future, it looks that at least 10 years from now, coal plants will remain in India, and slowly RE will increase, and coal generation will slow down its pace of increase. Of course, it will keep on increasing for at least for next 10 years. I don't see any alternate to coal plants for at least for next 10 years. Now, what can be done then? There is a already Sondram has said that standards have been implemented. Standards have come up. They were to be implemented from 2017, and now extended date is 2022. I believe that these standards, a lot of research needs to be done before Gazette notification is issued for these such standards, environmental standards. A typical coal-based power plant will at least take 2 to 3 years for installation. Before that, site selection. Before that, environmental clearance, and then designing, etc. So it's a question of 5 to 6 years. As far as sulfur dioxide norms are concerned, the move started in 2003 from Corporate Responsibility for Environmental Protection. From there itself, space was supposed to be reserved by power plants for putting up an FGD. So indications were given by the regulatory authorities that FGD may come. Time only, it's a question of only time. Now, after 2010 or so, some plants were given, in environmental clearances, some plants were given sulfur dioxide standards also. Even some plants, NOx standards were also given. From 2015, actual new norms had started. So there is not now the Gazette notification has come. So there is no question of now arguing that whether standards are to be implemented or not to be implemented. They have to be implemented. It's a law, and law needs to be implemented. Questions can come for any law, even for prohibition orders are issued in some states. So people can say whether prohibition should be there or not. But once the gazette is issued, it has to be implemented. So CSC working paper, a lot of work has been done. I feel this is a lot more work needs to be done. There is a lot of coordination required between MOEF, CPCB, CERC, SERCs, power plants, then regional load dispatch centers, then Ministry of Power, CEA. A lot of coordination work will be required, and this will keep on going at least till 2022, and maybe after 2022 more vigorously. So I feel the CSC paper is very good. Now, now what is how power purchase is how power is purchased? Sudram has already explained. There more than 90% of electricity is purchased through long-term PPAs, power purchase agreements, which are typically for 25 years, plus minus some years. And the tariff is two part. One is fixed cost, one is variable cost. The fixed cost is the component which is the investment cost, the capital cost of the plant, plus the O&M cost. And variable cost is only the fuel cost. Now, of course, variable cost, the this calcium sulfate, etc., FGD, calcium lime, etc., has also been given in the variable cost. But typically, it is variable cost. Mainly, it is variable cost is only fuel cost. In addition to this, there is one is UI charges, which are given based on the based on the frequency of the power plants. So fixed cost, in any case, they are governed by the power purchase agreements, and they have to be, these are commercial contracts, and they have to be paid the fixed cost. Unless there is some arrangement, these contracts are reworked, etc. Now, power plants give their commitments to the load dispatch centers, and from load dispatch centers, states give their requirement of the power, and power plants give their what they can generate, and a match is made by the load dispatch centers, so that power, because in power the problem is there is no storage in between. So the power generated at one end has to be given at the used at the other end immediately. So a lot of work is required. The slots are given for 15 minutes, and they power is matched. Demand and supply is matched. Next, please. Now, what happens if state pollution control boards, if they restrict the if the state pollution control boards, if they restrict the availability of the capacity of the power plant to generate power for a particular level, this can be done based on the sulfur dioxide emitted as per actual, and the sulfur dioxide norm which has been stipulated. A ratio can be fixed, and based on that, the annual average availability can be reduced. It can be capped. Once that annual average, why I'm talking about annual average availability can be capped, because there is a technical minimum on which thermal power plants need to operate, which is presently around 55%. There are attempts going on to reduce it further, but at present it is around 55%. If the plant does not operate at 55% plant load factor, it is technically difficult for the plant to operate, because then ramp up or ramp down becomes difficult for the power plant. So if it is done on an annual average basis, the plant can operate for a few months at full load, and then need not operate for remaining part of the year, and the overall average annual availability is maintained, which is capped by the pollution control board. This way, the plants will also be able to operate. We will be able to meet the demand, and we will also the plants will also get reduced plant capital cost back, fixed cost back to them, and state pollution control board have power to put such caps. So this, in my opinion, will be the best solution. Now, what happens if the demand is more and the power plants after capping are not able to generate to that extent? Those plants, in such situations, in peak hours, the plants which have been capped, their caps can be removed for that much of period, and then the difference between the actual variable cost and the merit order dispatch rate, whichever is in the end, that difference can go to some other funding, and then that fund can be used for environmental benefits, etc. So that way, this capping will change the merit order dispatch order of the generation of the power plants, and in that order, the cleaner plants will get first run. Then that is the yellow category plant. The orange category plant will run under cap of availability, and red category plants will have to be closed. That's all. I think my opinion is. Thank you, Sunil.
Thank you, Asuji. Like you have introduced a new concept where you talked about capping methodology under merit order dispatch. Thank you very much. And before I invite my next panelist, I just want to take one or two questions. Now, Mr. Gaurav Samkaria have said, just want to understand why CSE was not able to fight back when government agencies were diluting NOx norm from 300 to 450. I do not know, Gaurav, from where you got this information that CSE did not fought back. Please go through our Down to Earth website, and there you will find 2 or 3 articles by Sundram Ramanathan, where she has given how NOx emission of 300 can be met easily by the Indian power plant. These articles are still there on the Down to Earth website. Please go through it, and if you don't find it, please call back Sundram and she will provide you the link to you. And another question is from Mr. Prem Chand Talreja. Now he has said organizations like CSE need to exhibit its seriousness. Norms were implemented after long deliberation, and now we seem to accept that this is difficult, but organizations like CSE have to be firm and not start accommodating and compromising environmental norms. Premchandji, I want to ensure we are very much serious. We are not serious today. We were serious 10 years back, and even in 2015 when the norms came. The reason for us coming out with this concept of first run is this is going to incentivize complying unit. And with 50% of the fixed cost, it will not be easy for the thermal power plant to operate. So what will happen? They will do their best to meet the 22 deadline. So we are serious, Mr. Premchandji. Now I would like to invite my next panelist, Mr. Ashok Srinivas from Prayas Energy Group. Mr. Ashokji, I would like you to first comment on the presentation made by the Sundram, and also based upon your experience, how to deal with this very powerful sector, thermal power plant? To you, Mr. Ashokji.
Thank you, Nivit, and thank you, CSE, for organizing this webinar on a very important topic, and also coming up with a proposal like first run, which is a interesting idea, definitely, and we all need to collectively think of innovative solutions that we can now propose as a way forward to, as you rightly said, incentivize those who are complying with the norms and disincentivize those who are not complying with the norms in the context of the current power sector and the changes that are happening in it. So in that sense, I think this is a very important webinar, and I completely agree that uh, unfortunately, though the norms were notified almost 5 years ago, and effectively they were given 7 years to comply with the norms, it is looks like the norms are not going to be met. I think that is a practical reality, as your first run report has also suggested, that there are a lot of plants. I mean, there'll be some plants which will probably meet it, but a lot of them are unlikely to meet it, and that is a reality. And I think one of the other things that I just wanted to flag was that, at least in the discourse, firstly, I think I should say that whatever I say is coming more from an understanding of the situation from the power sector side of the equation. I'm not an expert on pollution or environment, or indeed even the environment, the regulating agencies like CPCB, SPCB, what powers they have, what they don't have. My statements are more made from my understanding of the power sector and understanding of what the agencies in the power sector can do. And the first point that I really want to share is that I'm a bit surprised that uh, since these norms are actually notified by MOEFCC and their environmental norms, the discourse is currently being led by the power sector and not by the environmental ministry and corresponding agencies, which itself I think is a cause for concern or cause for questioning what is happening. I mean, for example, the latest proposal from CEA to actually phase out implementation of these norms depending on pollution and location and so on. I mean, I'm not even sure it is a C. I mean, these are the kinds of things that are the MOEFCC's responsibility, and we believe that that is how the responsibility should be shared across different agencies. Having said that, I think what I would like to focus on a little bit is that coming up with mechanisms for compliance to these norms is really more of a policy issue. So, and why I want to state that is that in the power sector, at least, and to perhaps also in the environment sector, there is a different role that is envisaged for the Ministry of Power and other policy forming bodies and regulatory bodies such as the CERC and the state regulatory commissions. And the regulatory commissions and regulatory bodies have a limited mandate in terms of trying to ensure that this happens. The greater thrust in terms of, let's say, the kind of mechanisms that you are proposing, first run based mechanism, or as Ashuji mentioned, trying to introduce availability as a mechanism to see what can be done. These actually solutions have to be mandated or come from the ministry level organizations or policy making organizations. What the regulators can do and should do is to ensure that these mandates are implemented, or they enable the implementation of these mandates more easily. So, for example, in the power sector, the regulators have a very important role because, as Soundaram mentioned, installing these equipments is going to cost money. And if it's going to cost money, somebody has to pay the cost for it, which means it has to reflect finally in the consumer's electricity tariff in some way or the other. The approval of this cost, the cost of installing this equipment and operating this equipment is in the hands of the regulator. So the processes required for that, how you do that. So those are the kinds of things that a regulator can actually make it easier. The CERC has come out with some regulations. They've come out with one set of regulations, and another set of regulations is kind of in a draft stage, which is expected to get finalized soon regarding how this can happen. So there is some progress on that front, but one really wishes that it could actually be more proactive, and more steps could be taken by the CERC and other regulators to make this process smoother. For example, having some kind of a uniform benchmarking framework which will enable easier approvals of these costs and their enable financing of these things. Currently, these are taken up on a case-to-case basis. Each power plant in the country, whatever 300, 400 power plants we have in the country, has to individually apply saying that I'm going to install a pollution control equipment. This is how much it is going to cost me. Please approve my cost. So rather than that, if they had a more generic benchmark-based approach, we believe that that might make things easier. One other issue that we find with the current regulations that needs to be perhaps improved upon is that currently the costs are uh, approved only based on a prudence of the cost. So if I have a, let's say, 500 megawatt plant and I'm installing certain equipment and I claim that it's going to cost me so many crores, the regulator only checks that the cost I'm mentioning is appropriate to the kind of plant I have and approves the cost. There is no mechanism to actually ensure that the cost is paid to me only if I'm actually using the equipment. Remember, the reason why we are putting this equipment is so that we can use the equipment and actually reduce emissions. The current regulations, I do not think, as far as I know, do not include a provision for that, which we find is a bit of a lacuna in the current regulations. And also similarly, on the other side, whether how do you actually incentivize early movers? If somebody actually installs pollution control equipment before the deadline, it's a good thing. But unfortunately, the way the scheme of things currently runs, they will incur an extra cost and therefore they will actually go lower in the merit order dispatch stack because I'm actually going to incur extra cost. So how do I incentivize such early movers? So these are the kinds of things that perhaps regulators can do. But as I said, but the bigger kind of solutions, such as the first run mechanism that you have suggested, or other kinds of financial penal mechanisms which can be innovative, but uh, to penalize non-compliance, to incentivize early compliance, and to at the same time ensure that the electricity supply is not disrupted, because as I think various both Soundaram and Mr. Gupta have pointed out, this is an important infrastructure sector and nobody wants their power supply to, nobody would be happy if their power supply got lost, especially because they are not really facing the brunt of the pollution. Most of us are just enjoying the benefits of the electricity and not facing the brunt of the pollution caused by the electricity. So we would rather ensure that our electricity supply is not disrupted. So kind of balancing these various interests of ensuring that electricity supply is not disrupted while pollution norms are, adherence to pollution norms is incentivized, requires some innovative solutions. And one hopes that more and more such ideas come forward and one can actually convince the ministries and the government agencies to adopt these solutions so that the current approach of, this sector being too important and too big and they know that they can't be shut down because of their very importance, does not become a hindrance to actually following good environmental practices or operational practices. I think I'll stop here and we can maybe discuss more in the Q&A session. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ashok ji. It was an interesting feedback from your end. Now I would like to invite Karthik. Karthik, like before I have some questions for you, but before I start, I just want your quick feedback. And also, you have also done a lot in this field. Like what needs to be done to ensure environmental compliance? As Ashok ji have said and as Asu Gupta ji have said, various organizations have to come up based upon their experience. What can be the mechanism? So you have also got a good amount of experience. So I invite you for your comments, Karthik.
Sure. Thank you, Nivit. Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah, clearly.
Great. Thank you so much for having me on board. I concur with the views that Ashok has put out as well on this. I mean, at the core of it, I think it is a lack of internalizing what is the health cost associated with non-compliance. Right? If we as a country, as policymakers, as a population understood that this is serious impact on the population, we would definitely act on it. Now, the fact is that we've not internalized it. And the powers that be have figured out that, well, as long as the people are not aware of it, we can basically kick the can down the road and delay the implementation as much because nobody is raking up as much a fuss as Ashok was mentioning. Perhaps the outage of power is more significant, but in reality, right, the cost that is being borne by places which are impacted by power plants on a regular basis is far higher than any inconvenience that they're having to bear as a result of power outages itself. In terms of the cost, I think we've got a lot of studies that monetize these costs, right? But the problem is we don't attribute it to power pollution. I think that is where the core of it is. And this brings us to the point that, again, Ashok brought up, which is the tussle between MOEFCC and MOP, right? MOEFCC has the entire sort of mandate in this particular area to decide, right, what has to be done with regard to implementation of standards. MOP coming out and saying something which is unscientific, which is to the extent of saying that SO2 concentration in various areas, right, is well below the threshold, and as a result, we have to now recategorize and reprioritize who will be implementing FGD is ridiculous at best, right? SO2 is not the metric with which you should measure whether SOx pollution is high or not. Ultimately, as Saundram has mentioned, it converts to particulate matter, right? We have to ultimately look at what is the particulate matter pollution in a particular place, not SO2. So, and clearly, I think the way the ministry is structured today, I mean, as I said, it looks like MOP has the heft, right? MOEFCC has become, unfortunately, more about allowing for. I mean, and that's the debate that we've all seen, which is to allow for things to progress more faster. Whether it is environmental clearances, I think there's conversation on both sides, which is to say, this is the environment ministry that's supposed to safeguard the environment, whereas a lot of allegations suggesting that it is actually enabling clearances faster. So if that is indeed the case, then they should weigh up and they should present the evidence. And all of the evidence says, right, that particulate matter from arising from coal from power plants across the country contributes to anywhere between 7 and 11% of overall PM 2.5. Coal from power plants alone, which includes the SOx and the NOx contribution as well. So given all of this, the priority must be to prioritize it no matter what. The second sort of dichotomy that I'm seeing is this, right? When I look at the plants that have, put in their bids for, the tenders, right? Opened, bids awarded and then bids being evaluated. I see a lot of plants that are to be phased out in the 2022 and 2027 timeline, right? I'm happy that they're doing it in the sense that, well, even though they're likely to be phased out, they're still installing it because technically the cost that these plants will incur as on a paise per kilowatt hour metric is actually far higher than some of the plants that have much longer life, right? What does this mean? This is also telling me there's a mixed signal, which is that are you really intending to phase out some of these plants? And that brings us to another important question, which is the Indian power system today, right? And I think this is in the power sector research community, we have a lot of body of research on this. We are significantly surplus when it comes to the capacity that we have, right? Especially given that we have 60 gigawatt of brand new thermal power plants under construction, which will come on board in the next 7 to 8 years, right? Even with the retirements that have been planned, we know that we will have a lot more excess capacity. Now, a big part of the dilemma really is you have all of these plants which are likely to be retired, which don't have too many more years of operation, which are inefficient at the core. And yet, they are all candidates for, retrofitting, right? They will be used a lot because primarily a lot of these plants have low cost coal, which means their variable cost at the end of the day is very, very low. Right? So given that these plants are likely to function, 30 years, 35 years, 40 years, right? The message is in fact very unclear. So we have to be very clear as a country, what are we prioritizing? Are we prioritizing efficiency, right? Or are we prioritizing corporate profits? The fact is that, NTPC as the beneficiary of low cost coal from, for many decades has basically got some of these very, very old units. But they're not necessarily the most efficient units, but on a variable cost basis, they are actually the cheapest units in the country. Nobody will let them go, right? So effectively, what is also happening is, because some of these plants, the private sector plants and the state plants, their schedules are, not very clear because they can't compete in the merit order as much. Their dispatch is not very clear. And as a result, they're all hesitant because their ability to repay any loan that they take against installation of FGD will be limited because if their dispatch is not clear, if they can't compete in the market as much, they will obviously hesitate to install this and they will drag their feet. And that is effectively what has happened as well, right? Equally, the processes being unclear has also made it a challenge for the regulators to clear them. This, one by one clearance, as Ashok was mentioning, right? That can easily be avoided if you have an independent third party who basically approves of the cost required for every plant. And the SCRC basically approves it, saying that, what, the pass-through is guaranteed. This independent agency has estimated that this is indeed the cost, right? And that can be sort of blind appointment of consultants. Blind as in, the government appoints it. There is no collusion between the person who's evaluating and the entity. That assessment happens and the pass-through of the cost is guaranteed. And MOP has made that amply clear. And with regard to the merit order challenge itself, my own feeling is that as long as you know that this cost is a pass-through, merit order must not be impacted by the installation. If at all, we basically say you only get to dispatch if you install this. I mean, of course, that there are slight problems, of course, with the formulation, as we discussed Nivit separately, right? With the way of, with the proposal that you have, which is the orange, red, and the yellow category. Because as Mr. Ashugupta rightly said, right, not giving them their fixed cost is tantamount to contractual breaking. Right? That cannot happen that very easily. So as a result, we have to have a very clear deadline. Unfortunately, that deadline is not 2022 December. That deadline will certainly be further down, but we have to come up with an absolute stop and say beyond this date, these plants cannot operate and MOEFCC needs to put its foot down and MOP cannot take center stage. So unless we address the issue, I think the core issue is if you can address the surplus, fast track the exit of inefficient power plants from the system, that will give a lot of incentive and direction to those power plants which are likely to function in the long run to accelerate their deployment of FGDs. Without that clear signal, if you're going to keep extending the life of our power plants from 35 to 40 to 45 years, then there is no clear sign that we will ever be in a position to dispatch some of the younger, more efficient assets. And those are the ones that we should retrofit pronto. And for that, accelerated phase out of inefficient power plants is absolutely essential. 2022 and 27, there is a plan, I think, to decommission about 42 gigawatt worth of capacity. That needs to be brought forward. Given the capacity that's coming online, given the renewable energy stock that's on board, that timeline just does not give any clarity for any new investment in the sector, especially for power plant retrofits. So I think if we can address that, Nivit, we'll probably be in a very good shape. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karthik. And thank you very much for coming out with some of very interesting point, like talking about phasing out inefficient plant. On 14th of December, we had a workshop on webinar on how to reduce GHG emission from coal-based power plant. So there we have touched upon this topic. Thank you very much. Now we have got something around 15 plus 10, around 20 minutes, and I will take questions from. Let me go through the question answers section. Karthik, I would like you to take up the first question. Like it is by Mr. Sripad Dharmadikari. He is saying, like he is responding to CSE proposal, if 50 to 100% fixed cost is denied to defaulting TPP, will this not directly affect their ability to pay back the loans to more than the TPP? It is the lender bank that will be most affected.
Absolutely. Yeah. So thank you, Sripad, for this question. And I think, it's a very complicated question. And as everybody knows, NTPC is taken the first step in installing or in at least calling for the bids and installing these systems, primarily because they were able to get the orders passed by CERC and they're able to get the loans necessary to do the installation. The financial status of the private sector power plants and the state sector power plants is not nearly as good, which means that they will find it difficult to, first of all, raise any additional funding to support any new rollout. So which means that they're already stressed. So now on the back of that, if you basically say, so which means that, it's a catch-22 situation. They're not able to raise the capital in the market in the first place because their financial position is already poor. So you cannot penalize them and say that if you do not install, we will basically, deploy you even less or dispatch you even less. You have to create a level playing field, right? By first of all, ensuring and assuring, right, that all costs incurred will be passed through. But the big challenge is this. You look at the outstanding today, from the discoms to the power producers. Today, it's of the order of 1,34,000 crore. At the start of the pandemic, that number was at 90,000 crore, right? Where the ministry basically created the second package. And whereas, of course, NTPC is not one of those entities that faces this backlash. They get their payments relatively more on time, whereas it's the state and the central power plants and the private sector power plants which inordinately face this delay. Renewable energy significantly so as well. So unless we clear for this issue of payment delays to power producers, and if their financial health even without FGDs and other retrofits does not improve, it is very unlikely that they will be able to convince a lender to actually give them the money. So I think telling them that, we will not dispatch you anymore is not going to help them raise the capital in the first place because they're not getting paid on time for whatever electricity they're generating already. So that needs to be fixed for, and that, of course, as you know, is the biggest problem that faces the power sector, which is of discom viability and how do they pay up. So ultimately, of course, all of this is linked to that. And part of the solution that I propose, which is the accelerated phase out of inefficient power plants, will hopefully bring down the overall cost of power procured in the economy. And unless we can bring down the overall cost of power procured in the economy, it is very unlikely that discoms will suddenly be in a better position to pay up for all of these costs of retrofits and everything else. Thank you.
Like, I understand what you are saying, Karthik, but what I am saying, if NTPC has raised, they have approached the CRC, they must be commended for it. Okay? And if our state regulatory, state power plant are sitting idle, thinking state government will do something, I think this is like I like, as I am also working in many states. Okay? Now this is the problem happening across the country. The private players are taking this initiative and state power plant are sitting idle thinking they will not be shut down. Now, that is another problem. And I have got a comment from Dr. Dr. B. Sen Gupta, longest serving member secretary of Central Pollution Control Board. He said, Nivit, please note that uncontrolled SOx and NOx emission shall increase secondary aerosol formation, which increases PM 2.5 pollution. IIT and TERI study indicate 25 to 30% PM 2.5 due to secondary aerosol.
Right, right. This is the point that I think Saundaram also mentioned, which I think we are in agreement with. Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Dr. B. Sen Gupta. And Dr. B. Sen Gupta has been guiding CSE researcher for last 10 years. And thank you very much for your guidance, Dr. B. Sen Gupta. A very let's come to some of the complex question. And here hypothetical situation. Okay? Now question is open, anybody can answer. Mr. Sarat Chand Lele have asked, what if Sundaram CSE responds the point made by Gupta, if PPA is 25-year-old contract, how can you unilaterally change it to reimburse only 50% of the fixed cost? Anything from you, Dr. Asu Gupta? You are implying Sundaram? Yeah,
yes,
please
sir.
go. Please go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yeah. So unilaterally, we can't suddenly say that the fixed cost should be 50%. But an indirect way of doing it is, I will say the polluting plant should not run more than 3 months or 2 months. So which means technically they will not be available for the rest of the time, and that means their fixed cost will be, they will not get their fixed cost fully.
Like what Sundaram is saying here, like we had a discussion with some of the state pollution control board officers, and they said, if state pollution control board closes this non-complying unit, then for that period, they will not be paid the fixed cost. So again, there are, let me come to some other question. I hope we have answered you, Dr. Sarat Chand Lele. Done. Acha. Like Mr. Ashok, now this question is for you. Like if you go through the India's commitment to Paris Agreement in 2015, there is a special section on coal-based power plant. Indian government have promised many things. even like there they have talked about this new new stringent norms. There they have talked about improving the efficiency of the coal-based power plant. But like when we see in 2020, all discussion have come to installation of 175 gigawatt of renewable, and nobody is talking about what promise Indian government has made sector wise.
Yeah, so from what I understand, basically we have made three commitments under the Paris Accord. One is that by 2030, the amount of generation capacity in the electricity sector that we will have from non-fossil sources will be 40%. The second is that the emissions intensity of our economy will go down by 33 to 35% by 2030 compared to 2005 levels. The third is that we will increase our forest cover and ability to absorb carbon dioxide by some amount. I don't remember the exact amounts. So these are the three commitments we've made under the Paris Accord. And in a way, these are a completely, I would say, parallel or independent discussion to the discussion we are having today. Yeah. And it is true that the way the power sector is going today, we are very much on track to meet the first uh, commitment we made under the Paris Accord, which is a 40% installed capacity, at least 40% installed capacity. I think we are already about 30, 35, more than 30%. So meeting 40% by 2030 is going to be not going to be difficult at all, especially with aggressive targets such as 450 gigawatts of renewables by 2030. So that is not unlikely to be a challenge. The issue of emissions intensity of the economy is a slightly harder one to track because it firstly requires you to measure your emissions very accurately, which uh, different people might have different opinions about that. But even there, I believe from whatever literature I have seen, I don't think we should be on target to meet that also, compared to given the rate at which both the energy intensity of our economy is reducing as well as the emissions intensity of the energy sector. The third one is something that I'm not really, it's not my area of expertise. I really don't know how we are doing in terms of afforestation and so on. And that is something that I think you at CSE are probably much better placed to answer whether we are meeting the Paris Accord, these things. But I would like to just close by reiterating that, in a sense, these two are completely independent things. One could have very, very polluting power plants which are producing a lot of particulate emissions and still meet the Paris Accord agreements. One could fail to meet the Paris Accord agreement and still have very, very clean power sector that's not producing too much particulate emissions. So in a way, these are two completely different discussions. If we want to discuss about Paris Accord and our commitments there and GHG emissions, that's a separate discussion. So I'll just stop there. Thanks.
Okay, now my next question is to Sundram. Dr. B.J. Prasad have asked, the old thermal power plant having balanced life of less than 7 to 8 years may be hesitant to install FGD. Some provision could be included with respect to this in the recommendation. Any suggestion, Sundram?
So the investment themselves, they don't go in for large investments because they don't get approval. And the age range, what he's talking is mostly is with state gencos, and maybe Tata Power might have one or two units in that particular category. So typically the norms are also relaxed for them. All that they have to do is just reduce their sulfur dioxide level, and they don't need a scrubber unit fully. They can still pump in some limestone, etc., into the tubes, into the and co-fire, and maybe get some benefits. So they can co-fire biomass and they can bring it below 600. And so there are cost effective technologies which are available for them, which they need to explore. And if it is going to be just 5 to 6 years that they're looking at their lifespan, then they should have a proper retirement plan, or maybe they should consider some alternative. And well, but the retirement plan usually doesn't work on ground, because in Andhra Pradesh we have this Kottagudam thermal power station, TPS 2 and TPS 1, which are very old. And every time the Telangana Genco, earlier it was AP Genco, Andhra Pradesh Genco, when they went for clearance, the condition which was imposed on them was you please close down your old units and then come for clearance for the new units. But it's always a negotiation, and the plant has been running, even though it says it's 5 to 7 years life, it has been running now 20 years, even after it's 25 years. So it's typically now 45-50 years the units are running.
Mr. Kavita Shah have asked a very good question. She asked, do you think the NGT and MOEFCC norms for ZLD and other pollution standard, or the use of low-cost coal, SOx and particulate matter good enough to ensure proper implementation by the thermal power plant? Very good question, Kavita. Like, I can say this is one of the limitation of the CSE proposal. Thermal power plant, there is a issue of PM emission, SOx emission, NOx emission. There is a issue of fly ash. There is a issue of water use and wastewater discharge. And there is also a issue of mercury emission, which have been mentioned in the notification. But the problem is all the discussion have come around only. They will be able to meet the PM norms. The norms have been relaxed so much that now it can be met by all the thermal power plant. Now people are only talking about SOx. Nobody is talking about right now on the waterfront and as well as on fly ash and mercury. In the month of January and February, we will be taking up this issue. But yes, I will accept once again, like this is the limitation of the recommendation which CSE have made. Thank you, Kavita, for an excellent question. Mr. Aradhana Sinde have asked, sir, what is the fixed cost concept? Please go through the website. There in the presentation, you will find the definition, Aradhana. Now, like I would like to ask Mr. Asu Gupta ji.
Yes, sir.
Do you think the closure of non-complying plant is a viable option?
The plants which are in the red category,
Yeah,
and the plants which are
old.
in any case, most of these plants are already planning a shutdown. That's why they have not given a plan. The problem is that they have not yet recovered the full cost which was to be recovered by them. The fixed cost is still balanced. So the PPAs will have to be reworked on, and then because the state has entered into the PPA with them, and the state will still need the electricity. So it will have to go to some other plant to get that electricity. So PPAs will have to be reworked. Like what happened in Badarpur, the fixed cost was reimbursed to them, and then only it was closed. So if the generating utility is making some other plants from where it can supply the electricity, newer plants, then that fixed cost can be shifted to the new plant. So some mechanism has to be worked out. The issue is no more technical issue. It is a commercial issue now. Implementation of these norms is becoming a commercial issue. It is no more technical. Nobody is now doubting that FGD is not successful or FGD is it will not be possible to implement. That's all I can say.
Thank you, Asu Gupta ji. Sundram, again, next question is for you. This is from Samendra Agrawal. He asked, while the idea of categorization is very good, how will the plant based on hydropower or gas be incorporated in merit order dispatch? Do we suggest that instead of just variable cost as criteria for merit order dispatch, shift to variable cost plus cleaner aspect of generated power as dispatching criteria?
Right. So that's a more larger concept what he has conceived, because when we say cleaner power, yes, of course, natural gas power plants also come into play. Hydro also to some extent, though many will dispute that, hydropower also has some environmental impacts. And we have fly ash also an issue, and as you mentioned, so water and mercury are also an issue. So all these factors should be taken into consideration. But right now, since sulfur dioxide is more prominent and it is disturbing the air quality in different cities. Just imagine the particulate matter levels in Delhi is soaring. People can't just stay, like, even in a lockdown situation, and when we open up, we can feel the difference of the air quality. And when we have a solution in hand, a low hanging fruit in hand, that if you install an FGD in a large polluting source like power plants, you can better your air quality in cities. Though it's hard to believe for anybody, I don't have a power plant in my city, why should my air be affected? But scientifically, when people are saying it's affecting and it can be handled, so we are taking the we are giving it little more weightage for now, and we are considering sulfur dioxide in this scheme of things. Of course, whichever is cheaper is what all of us need. The electricity, we want the cheapest source for us. So we are not saying don't disturb the current merit order practice. All that we are saying is, um, you follow the merit order practice, but then those which are compliant, you put them, even the natural gas, the hydro, everything together, you just schedule it. But those which are orange and those which are red, consider some amount of purchasing less from them. That's all the proposal is about, and we are not majorly right now we are not recommending any alterations to the purchase order right now.
Oh, I will take Mr. Hemraj Dang have said the polluting plant has to be penalized. Maybe they are fined a penalty, then asked to shut down, not fined 50% fixed cost. This will lead to financial shutdown in any case. Mr. Himraj Dangji, please go through the Sundram presentation. Now, what we are finding, the penalty imposed by the regulatory authority is peanut in comparison to the fixed cost they are receiving, even if they are not operating. And this is the reason why we are trying to connect compliance with fixed cost. So you go to the CSE website, there under the webinar section, you will find all the details plus the report. Now, next question I will ask Karthik. Cost of generation in thermal power plant is high, particularly compared to RE. If additional cost is added, it will further increase the generation cost, which will be additional burden on the consumer. How do you address this issue? This is by Mr. R.P. Kitolia.
Right.
Ritolia.
Right. So this is a great question, right? But at the end of the day, so let's just look at the system that the way it is today. For a bulk of the time, we are actually consuming energy. It is only fossil fuel energy that's actually supplying it. Renewable energy today in the country is giving on average maybe about 9% during the course of the year of our total energy requirements. And when you look at periods when the sun is not shining and when the wind is not there, typically 7 8 p.m. time, it is always coal-based energy. So there's no question of comparing fossil fuel and renewable energy today head to head because they do different things for us. So let's just keep it at one. So let's just say what you're absolutely right that the cost of coal-based energy will go up. But the main issue is this, that the cost that we are actually bearing as a society, which comes down to the medical costs associated with ailments of premature deaths, all of these are actually much higher than this cost increment that we are talking about, which is, in the few paise per kilowatt hour. So let me give you a sense of it. So for the overall implementation of the regulations, we're looking at about somewhere close to about 80,000 crore rupees. It doesn't mean all of that money will have to be paid on day one. Of course, like all things financed, it will be paid over a course of many years. And what we're basically saying is that on average, the cost of power will probably go up between 32 and 52 paise, which is not insignificant. But at the same time, right, let's take the example of the state of Delhi. First 200 units of electricity for every resident of Delhi is free. The government of Delhi is spending 2,800 crores a year in subsidizing consumption, right? I'm not sure of the financial state of many people in this call, but I can personally say I don't think that is necessarily very beneficial for all the consumers of Delhi. So you're absolutely right that this will be detrimental for many consumers who will find electricity more expensive. But this is upon the state governments to ensure that the money that they spend in subsidizing electricity consumption goes to those people who will truly need it. In the case of Delhi, it's completely wasteful, right? That is the same can be said of many other states. And of course, there are states like Uttar Pradesh where you will find that you'll probably need to find extra amount of support to enable that. But let's at least address it one state at a time. And I think addressing the low-hanging fruits like Delhi, Tamil Nadu, right? These are very, very important. Andhra Pradesh is very important to see how can we actually facilitate passing on this higher cost to the consumer.
Thank you, Karthik. I will take one last question. Not last question. Mr. Anil Kumar said, has CSE prepared point to counter CA dilution report? So, Mr. Anil, please visit our Down to Earth website. Search under the author name Sundaram Ramanathan. She had done a detailed piece on it. And you are asking for the CA report. No, a presentation has been made by the Ministry of Power, and based upon that presentation, we prepared our pointer, and it's available on the Down to Earth website. Now, with this, I want to close this today's webinar. I would like to thank all our attendees as well as all our panelists, Mr. Asu Gupta ji, Ashok ji, Karthik, Sundaram. Thank you very much for participating actively in this webinar and sharing your point. And to conclude, I would just want to say, CSE has come out with a proposal, and I am very thankful that all the panelists also have some proposal to make to the government to ensure non-complying units are penalized and good units are incentivized. How it has to be done varies from person to person. But I just want to say, air pollution is a very serious issue across the country, and I request Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change and Central Pollution Control Board to ensure thermal power plant meet the 2022 deadline. With this, I want to say thank you to